As Kurt stepped out of the Lexington airport into the bright sunshine, he stopped and took several slow, deep breaths. It might have been the area that he grew up in, but it wasn't an area that he had very good memories of. His childhood had been rough. In his teen years, he had bounced off the law more than playing within it. Only as he finally went into the Navy did everything improve tremendously. He'd learned discipline and growth. He'd learned what brotherhood was and what it meant to have people who were there for him and who wanted to help him. He'd been very wild and unruly. Going into the Navy had been the best thing he could have done. School was hit and miss for him, and he was not sure if he would graduate because he'd skipped so much school. But somehow he'd squeaked his way all the way through to becoming a Navy SEAL, and the rest was history. Until his accident. He'd spent 13 years in the Navy, with his last year in a hospital, but the previous 12 years as a Navy SEAL, the highlight of his career. He'd been in a freak underwater diving accident where part of a wreck came down on him. Everybody said it was a total accident and could have happened to anybody at any time, but the fact was it had happened to him. He looked down at his prosthetic lower right leg and gave it a shake. It always felt weird to think that this mechanical piece was attached to his body now. It was okay, but it just wasn't the same as what it had been before. But he'd long ago given up on feeling sorry for himself. He was alive. He'd almost drowned and then almost hadn't survived the accident. It was pretty hard to imagine a wake-up call with any less of a head smack saying, "Hey, what's next in your life?" He shook his head, walked toward the car rental office to pick up the truck he'd ordered. He knew a lot of people would laugh at his choice of a truck. In this case, a large dog was involved, so Kurt needed some space. He also didn't know what he was up against. With that in mind, he headed out for supplies at a pet store. Once inside, he saw a crate and contemplated it. But he decided that if and when he was successful in recovering this war dog, the cage was something that he could use for transporting the dog. In the meantime, it wasn't necessary. At least he hoped not. With all that on his mind, he walked into the strip mall at the end of the block, picked up a couple sandwiches from a corner deli and a coffee. With those, he headed back out to the street and into the truck. He stopped beside his vehicle to figure out with his cell's GPS exactly where he was going and determined the truck stop was about 20 miles away. He hopped into the vehicle and headed in the direction he needed to go. He couldn't imagine why the dog would be hanging around the same area unless something was keeping her there. Animals were fairly simple in that they had basic needs and were usually easy to understand. But the conflicting reports that Badger had been getting from various people wasn't good. It also could mean that the dog was no longer around if it had truly gotten vicious. It didn't take much for the locals to turn around and pop an animal like that to ensure that it became a non-issue before it ever got bad. He understood that sentiment in theory, but at the same time it was hard on the animals because they didn't get themselves into that situation on their own. Human intervention had picked up this poor female and put her into this crazy world. Kurt had no idea what the hell had happened to her, and may never find out in full, so he needed to trace her movements back to her. The truck stop was about another 10 miles from a small town where the family who'd originally adopted the dog had lived, and then the brother was another 6 miles approximately past that. And he was the one now in jail, the one who apparently knew nothing about the dog. How convenient for everybody. Kurt just shook his head thinking about what Sabine had probably been through all this time. Most of the world would probably just say, "Forget it, shoot the dog," and move on. Kurt wasn't built that way. Every one of the animals on this earth deserved a chance, particularly when it was a human who had messed them up in the first place. Still, Kurt could only do so much, and the first thing was to see if he could find that dog. As he drove by familiar places, memories plagued him. He'd had a girlfriend off and on throughout high school, but since he was headed down a dark and windy path back then, he knew he needed to break away from her. Her parents had been totally against their association, and even though the teens had snuck around as much as they could, it had been hard to continue their relationship. Yet it had also added to the danger and the joy. He shook his head as he turned onto the main freeway, heading toward the truck stop. It didn't make any sense to even have these memories at this point in time. He didn't know why Laurie Ann's voice popped into his head. It had been 13 years since he'd seen her. He had gone to her the night before he was due to leave, and she'd pushed him away.